We are moving into Ukraine. Ukraine, it's still a thing. The Ukraine war is still happening, but it appears that the narrative around this particular war is starting to take a turn in reference to politicians in DC. Yes, believe it or not, it appears that they are finally starting to admit that we don't really know if we can continue to give you funding. They're also saying that we are now at the bottom of the barrel. Now, this is from Hotspot. Listen to this here, and we're going to get into this discussion with Tucker Carlson and Thomas Massie.
Is the department worried that funding for Ukraine won't be allocated by the end of the year, as it is set to run out according to OMB?
So we have made very clear at every level of this administration that Congress needs to act to fund security assistance to Ukraine, to fund economic assistance to Ukraine, to fund not just security assistance to Israel, but humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people, which we have been providing and we want to provide more. We are at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to our ability to provide security assistance to Ukraine. Ukraine is about to enter what we know will be a very difficult winter.
We are at the bottom of the barrel. And there's more, because believe it or not, even Lindsey Graham, this is how you know it's over for you, Zelensky. This is how you know you're reaching the tipping point, because now even Lindsey Graham, who was adamant about funding Ukraine, is now saying a different tune. Now, this comes from Danny Haifong, actually shared this on Twitter. Neocon Lindsey Graham says no more future Ukraine aid until the U.S. helps itself. Ukraine is finished. Uh-oh. Here we go.
So I will not vote for any aid until we secure our own border. Reform asylum, reform parole is possible to do. Democrats don't want to do it. All Republicans want to do it. I'm not helping Ukraine until we help ourselves. So I will not vote for any aid until we secure our own border. Reform asylum, reform parole is possible to do. Democrats don't want to do it. All Republicans want to do it. I'm not helping Ukraine until we help ourselves. So
that's coming from Lindsey Graham. Now, why is that important? Because recently there was a vote, and Chuck Schumer did not like the outcome of that vote, where Republicans actually blocked funding for Ukraine. Listen to this. We are going in. This is from Chuck Schumer. Sad night for the Senate and America. Republicans blocked funding for Ukraine, Israel, humanitarian aid for civilians in Gaza, funding for the Indo-Pacific. If Republicans want to get don't get serious about a national security package, Putin's going to walk right through Ukraine and Europe. First of all, I think this is an exaggeration of Vladimir Putin walking right through Ukraine and Europe. I don't think that's his intentions at all. But it's just interesting. He said, sad night for Senate and America. Republicans blocked it, funding for Ukraine and others as well. But to Lindsey Graham's point, basically what he's saying is, until we take care of the border issue, I'm not approving any more funding for Ukraine or apparently anyone else. Now, this gets into this conversation with Tucker Carlson and Thomas Massie, because one of the more vocal people in reference to funding Ukraine and Israel, I would say Thomas Massie has been consistent on both of these issues. When he said no funding to Ukraine, he also said no funding to Israel. Others have not. So Thomas Massie is still sticking to his guns here, and he's been heavily attacked by AIPAC, as you can imagine, also some of his own colleagues in the Republican Party. But Thomas Massie is not wanting to budge. This is kind of his thing where he's like, no, we are not going to be sending money to other countries for these wars. So I'll give him cred for being consistent. So Tucker Carlson had a conversation with Thomas Massie recently in reference to this issue. I'm just going to fast forward to where he brings in Thomas Massie here. Here we go.
Massie of Kentucky, who we wanted to talk to about this and also to thank for his bravery and steadfastness. Congressman, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, I've got so many questions, but well, why don't you just tell us why you're not voting for this?
Well, we can't afford it. Look, at some point, I realized we had spent more in Ukraine than we spend on all our roads and bridges in the United States. And I tweeted that. And Newsweek did a fact check on me. And what they found out is it was true.
Right there. He said, we have spent more in Ukraine than we have on our own roads and bridges in the United States. Now, I probably don't agree with Thomas Massie on any other policy issue, except for when it comes to funding these wars. Billions and billions of dollars have gone to Ukraine. Billions and billions of dollars that we could have used right here in this country, that we can still use in this country. We are taking care of somebody else. It's just, it's crazy. People have been calling us out for quite some time, but it's too much. It's too much. Now, Zelensky's not happy about this. Zelensky's not going to be happy, but I think Zelensky is finally starting to see that, I don't know, his meal ticket that he has with the United States is coming to an end.
And, you know, when you get the fact checkers to admit that a conservative, when they give them a mostly true rating, it's a metaphysical certainty. And since then, we've spent twice as much in Ukraine as we do on all of our roads and bridges federally in the United States. That is money that could have gone to double our infrastructure. Yet we're blowing up infrastructure that we're going to end up, I hate this, but they're going to tell us that we have to rebuild it when this is all over with.
The scale of this insanity is hard to digest. And I think whatever empire comes after ours will spend time studying it, you know, what not to do.
Pause right here. Notice what Thomas Massie said about they're going to come to us and ask us to rebuild it. When all this is said and done and Ukraine loses, which they are losing now, who is going to be responsible for rebuilding Ukraine? Because remember, recently Kamala Harris went to the Middle East and she told other Arab countries that they're going to help rebuild Gaza. The other Arab countries that had nothing to do with this conflict at all. But the US government was sending the weapons to Israel, right? So who's going to help rebuild Ukraine? It's not going to be Russia. So most likely they'll be looking to us. And where's that money supposed to come from?
But you got to wonder, like, why is the leadership of your party, the Republican Party, in favor of this? Why the new speaker, who seems like a nice guy, but also like a child? Why would his first act as speaker be to endorse this? I'm confused.
Well, I hope he doesn't. But, you know, Biden's budget director, the head of the OMB, sent a letter yesterday to Speaker Mike Johnson, imploring him to spend more money in Ukraine. And what they said is they want to revitalize our defense industrial base. It's that's the new acronym, DIB, for the MIC, the Military Industrial Complex. And they sent a list of states that would get money when we spend, you know, money on deadly munitions, because they have to be manufactured in Alabama or Ohio or Texas. And so, you know, they're saying the quiet part out loud, that congressmen tend to vote for this stuff because a lot of this federal spending that goes to Ukraine is actually laundered back to the military industrial complex. And in some ways, not very efficiently, but in some ways, it enriches people in their districts and the stockholders, some of whom are congressmen.
And Mike Johnson is from Louisiana, if I remember correctly. So his state could be one of those states that benefit from the military contractors in reference to these types of wars. But that's Thomas Massie saying the quiet part out loud, right? Like it benefits their state on the back end. But the other part that Thomas Massie does not mention is the fact that some of these politicians are in bed with the military industrial complex. They're receiving donations from Lockheed Martin or Raytheon or Boeing, you know, just like Vivek was saying about Nikki Haley. So that's the other piece that needs to be mentioned as well. But yeah, he's letting the cat out the bag.
You sort of, that's also grotesque, but it's also straightforward. You know, people are getting rich, so let's do it. Okay, that's an argument. It's an immoral argument, but it is one. But that's not the argument they're making in public. They're saying we have a moral obligation. You're a bad person. You just heard the National Security Advisor say that you're a bad person if you're against this. But no one ever mentions that we have abetted the killing of an entire generation of Ukrainian men that will not be replaced. to fight a war that they cannot win. They literally cannot win. We prevented a peace deal and we extended the war and we killed all these people. And so all the ones running around with their little Ukraine flag pins, they're implicated in that. Has anyone apologized?
Oh.
No, to support this money, you have to be economically illiterate and morally deficient. Those are both.
That's probably my favorite part of the conversation. Economically illiterate and morally deficient.
Cannot win. We prevented a peace deal and we extended the war and we killed all these people. And so all the ones running around with their little Ukraine flag pins, they're implicated in that. Has anyone apologized?
No, to support this money, you have to be economically illiterate and morally deficient. Those are both conditions of voting for this. Because to say that we're going to grind down Russia, that we're going to deplete their own soldiers by expending the lives of Ukrainians, knowing that in the end, we're going to leave them holding the bag, that in the end, they can never prevail. They're not going to take back Crimea, even though we say that's one of the goals. When we can get them to state goals, which usually they won't. So it's morally reprehensible to say that you should fund this. And by the way, he says I'm a friend of Putin because I won't vote for this money. Well, I would say that I'm a friend of Americans and I'm putting America first. But he's part of, I would say, Putin's reelection campaign, because Putin is a Cold War relic that was elected in response to our Cold War relic, which is NATO. By expanding NATO, the neocons and the liberals, every time they push NATO closer to Russia, they help people like Putin get elected.
Oh, Thomas, you better hold on to your seat, bud. You're saying too much. You're saying too much there. Yeah, it's really interesting in reference to the money, right? How the money is spent, who it goes to, who supports it, who doesn't support it. Thomas Massie apparently is secure within his district. It sounds like his constituents are happy with him and what he's doing in reference to them and as a politician. So he probably doesn't have anything to worry about there, but there is big money that will be coming his way. I saw AIPAC attacking him on Twitter already. They've already put out ad against him. So they will put up big money to get someone to probably primary him and get in someone that will do their bidding, which he doesn't seem to want to do. But the important thing that he said there is that he said they're not going to win back Crimea. And more politicians need to speak out and say that. It's like they're living in La La Land or something. Like, this is not a fairy tale where all of a sudden Ukraine comes back from pretty much nothing, where they're at the bottom right now, and they just end up taking back territory. I told you from the beginning, I didn't think that was going to happen. And so it is absolutely unrealistic to sit here and believe that that is a possibility. It's not. And we've given them a lot of weapons. We've given them a lot of aid, billions and billions of dollars worth, and they're still losing, which is what I predicted from day one. All that money gone out the door. And for what? And then we will have to help rebuild it. Rebuild it. We should be rebuilding in our country. We should be fixing our own infrastructure. And don't even get me started with the infrastructure bill, because I told you before, the American Society of Civil Engineers said that wasn't even half of what needs to be done to fix the infrastructure and maintain it in this country. Hot mess.
You know, outside our borders, it's very obvious that the whole world is resetting and that American influence is in very rapid decline, thanks in large part to this war in Ukraine, and that Russia is now joining this coalition, which will be the majority of the world's population and economy and military strength aligned against us. So this is resetting the world to our disadvantage. Again, leave the country. It's obvious your first day that this is happening very fast. Does anyone in Washington see that?
No, there are very few. You know, I've been voting against these resolutions in Ukraine and the money going to Ukraine since 2014. In 2014, we helped to overthrow their elected government. And we were saber rattling against Russia. And I said, listen, these sanctions and this saber rattling and these resolutions, they're going to have consequences. And they have had consequences.
Oh, yes. See, he brings up the fact that the U.S. was overthrowing their government. And here we are. We saw this happen with Saddam Hussein. They went in and said, let's overthrow Saddam Hussein. Next thing we knew, then you had ISIS. Like, the US government does not learn from trying to overthrow other countries' governments, but the US government doesn't care. They know that when they do that, that is going to give rise to more conflict, which can lead to war. But that's exactly what the US government wants. They want war because war for them equals profit, not profit for us, but profit for the weapon contractors. Peace isn't profitable. That's why they always want us to go to war.
Almost nobody in Washington, D.C. will admit this through their voting record. Now, they know it, but they won't admit it and they won't vote that way.
Do you think it's strange that, you know, maybe the single most consequential voice in this entire debate is a woman called Toria Nuland, who's the Undersecretary of State, who was a driving force behind the war in Iraq, which was, of course, a disaster and hurt the United States. She was never punished for that. In fact, she rose within the bureaucracy, and now she's running this war in Ukraine. And no one ever says her name. She's never held to account for all of this. She has far more influence on it than the entire United States Congress put together. How do we allow unelected lunatics like Toria Nuland, who clearly hates the United States and always has, to have this power over our lives and our children's future?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I feel like some of these deep state bureaucrats, they're like the kids who had no friends in high school. And somebody did something bad to them long ago. And now they've got some power and they realize how to grab it. And they're gonna have retribution on everybody else. Victoria Nuland was at a classified briefing to all members of Congress just a few weeks ago. And I thought, and this was on Israel. And I thought, wait, she's failed multiple times. Why are you dragging her out she has no credibility. Why are you having her brief Congress right now?
I mean, she's responsible or shares responsibility in the deaths of more people around the world than maybe any other living American. And yet she's in a classified briefing. I mean, I'm not saying she should be in prison, though you could certainly make a case for that. But she certainly should not have a security clearance and be briefing members of Congress. Did anybody say, wait a second, there's nobody more discredited than you are, Toria Nuland? Did anyone say that?
Some of you watching may have a more difficult time trying to get a security clearance than Victoria Nuland has been able to.
Nobody did. By the way, these classified briefings, they're basically propaganda spoon-fed to members of Congress directly from the deep state and from the administration. So we're going to have one today, in fact, on Ukraine. We will all file into an auditorium and leave our cell phones at the door. And we're just, you know, I'm sure this is going to be sort of a psyop or struggle session to get us to vote for more money to go to Ukraine.
I don't understand why the co-equal branch of government, the legislative branch, the Congress, allows itself to be manipulated by the intel agencies and the National Security Council. It seems like really crazy and masochistic even.
Well, listen, a lot of this money, too, isn't just going to lethal aid anymore. We're propping up the government. We're paying salaries of politicians in Ukraine, and we're paying pensions of politicians in Ukraine. Yesterday, I met with the Special Inspector General over Afghanistan, and I found out we've spent $6 billion there since we left. There's still money going to Afghanistan. And he said, you know, you really need, he doesn't want the job, but he said, you really need a special inspector general over Ukraine. And I said, what do you think, where could they be hiding some of this money, or where could it be going? And he said, well, look at what they did in Afghanistan. 30 or 40% of the special, the police in Afghanistan, their security forces, didn't exist. We were paying salaries for people who were on the payroll, but they weren't real people. And now that we're paying salaries in Ukraine, how do we know that those are real people?
You don't. That's the thing. Like, you don't. People have been saying this from day one. Scott Ritter said it when he was here a couple days ago. He said, this has been nothing but a big grift. Zelensky is a big grift. Where is all this money going? The Pentagon has failed multiple audits in the past couple of months. They can't even account for what they sent to Ukraine and for what, right? How much they sent and for what services. But the thing is like, how do you feel about the fact that your tax dollars could be going towards paying other people's pensions in another country, especially since I think a lot of you don't even qualify for a pension in this country? How many of you have jobs that if you retire through that job or that company, you get a pension? How many? Raise your hand. You don't hear that much these days. But when my parents were growing up, that was apparently like a thing, right? Like my parents talked to me about this. As you get older, you know, you get a job and then you retire with the company and then you get a pension. All that went out the window, man. All that went out the window. My generation, I'm a millennial. We don't get no damn pensions. Best we could do, 401k. And then depending on what your entry level salary is, you probably can't even afford to put money into the 401k. So there's that. They're like, sorry, bud, best we can do is 401k. Your tax dollars going towards paying pensions of a politician's salary in Ukraine, but you don't even get a pension in this country. A hot mess.
Matter of fact, we saw with the PPP program in the United States, people were getting money to pay people that weren't even on their payroll. So there are lots of obvious places to look for waste, fraud, and abuse. I wouldn't be funding it to start with. But if we are going to fund it, we need to have somebody auditing this.
It's such a humiliating way to end the American empire, such a self-destructive way. I don't think people fully understand just how deep in the hole we are. I noticed that on your blazer, you've got some kind of device, which I think tells us the answer. Can you explain it?
Yeah, so, you know, I went to MIT, I'm an electrical engineer, and I wondered how I could use my degree here in Congress. And I decided to build a debt clock that I could wear all the time. I wear it on the floor. I wear it in every hearing. And
I'm pausing here for just a second because shout out to the person in the chat who said this. Max said Massie built a solar powered car when he was at MIT. You know, I did not know that Thomas Massie went to MIT, but that explains a lot. Thomas Massie has been keeping track of all the freaking numbers. Okay. I used to work at MIT. So they're, you know, the students there, they're freaking brilliant. So he probably in the back of his mind is like, this is how much money we done spent in Ukraine. Damn it. We done did this. He made a freaking debt clock. Look at this. This is hilarious. And it's attached to his jacket. Boy, I tell you. I'm sorry. Let me go back because I want him to explain this debt clock.
I could use my degree here in Congress, and I decided to build a debt clock that I could wear all the time. I wear it on the floor. I wear it in every hearing. And the design goal was to induce anxiety. You know, we have congressmen and senators who have pacemakers. I thought they needed it. Their heart shouldn't be normal. It should be skipping beats and arrhythmic. So I built this to induce that anxiety. It's working pretty well so far. In fact, some congressmen, they vote, they put their voting card in, they press yay to spend the money, and then they look at my lapel to see if it's immediate enough to show the impact of their vote. But really, we need more people to be concerned about the debt. The interest on this is now going to overtake all of our military spending. We'll soon be paying more for interest on the debt than we do for our entire military.
I don't even think we'll ever pay it off, to be honest. I don't think that'll ever happen. I think the last time I remember that it was actually balanced, if I remember correctly, I believe that happened under Bill Clinton. I have to double check that, but I don't think we'll ever pay off all that money.
So that's another word for that is bankruptcy. It can't, I mean, because these are math questions, It can't continue indefinitely. In fact, I think we can see the end of it on the horizon. Is anyone afraid?
No, I don't think so. I think the only way we're going to get any kind of austerity or reality in our spending is when the people who loan us the money quit loaning it to us.
Right.
And what we'll go into is a spiral there. Like we did during COVID, we printed $5 trillion, created it out of thin air, and borrowed it from ourselves to make it look legitimate, filtered it through the bank so they could get some of the money too. And that's why we have inflation. I'm sorry, it's that simple. Again, you have to be economically illiterate. If you think that throwing another $5 trillion into the money supply isn't going to cause inflation, that's what we have. It's long lasting. Now, you know, the Fed was supposed to be the firefighter, but they're really the arsonist, and they're coming in and they're raising interest rates. And they've raised them to the point where it's going to be hard to, you know, buy a car or move into a house.
Well, and that's something that has been happening for several years. That is not a new thing. As long as I can remember, it's been difficult to buy a car or a house. But one thing I would mention to Thomas Massie is to explore MMT, right? Modern monetary theory tells us that that deficit, that budget, the ceiling or whatever they talk about, that's actually a myth, right? So that's something I think that he should, if someone were to interview him, I think they should talk to him about MMT. Now, it gets worse because Joe Biden is actually now starting to hint towards the possibility of sending American troops to go fight against Russia. Keogh says Biden is going to deploy American troops in Ukraine to fight Russia. So listen to this. He says it, you know, I don't know. The way that Joe Biden says it here, he kind of sneaks it in. So you have to pay attention. I wanted to use this TikTok version because it has the captions. Listen to what he said.
We've committed as a NATO member that we defend every inch of NATO territory. Then we'll have something that we don't seek and that we don't have today. American troops fighting Russian troops. American troops fighting Russian troops if he moves into other parts of NATO. We've committed as a NATO member that we defend every inch of NATO territory. Then we'll have something that we don't seek and that we don't have today. American troops fighting Russian troops. American troops fighting Russian troops if he moves into other parts of NATO.
So you see what's happening now? Now Joe Biden, sorry, I thought it had captions on it. Now Joe Biden is trying to hint towards the fact that we cannot stop funding Ukraine because then Putin will move further into NATO. First of all, let's back up a bit. NATO moved further to Putin, right? NATO moved closer to Russia, which it was not supposed to do. That was the agreement. It did it anyway. But now he's starting to instill this fear in the people and say, if we don't continue to fund Ukraine, Putin's going to take over NATO and then we're going to be facing a madman. I don't remember Russia saying that that's what they wanted to do. I don't remember them saying any of this, right? But this is what Joe Biden is doing. He's trying to instill fear in the American people to make you think this so that you agree with the money constantly going out the door to Ukraine. They're not going to win anyway. So how long is this supposed to continue? Are we supposed to continue to give Ukraine money for years? He's already considering it, folks. Bringing in American troops. And to that, I say hell to the no. Our troops should not go overseas to fight this freaking war. Let me go to some of the comments here. Thank you so much for the super sticker, Vera. Thank you for the super chat, Sparky. That's one reason why I say to make Ukraine Russia again, so BlackRock isn't rewarded with rebuilding it with U.S. taxpayer money. That's interesting. Thank you for this as well, Sparky. Make Ukraine Russia again. Thank you for this. Don't even leave a patch called Ukraine lest it remain a NATO and carpetbagger playground and money laundry, plus becomes a BlackRock property. You know, Ukraine's going to be a mess after all this is over. Their economy is going to be through. Thank you for this as well, Sparky. Make Israel Syria again. In those Ottoman Empire days, Jews and Arabs got along fine. They did get along fine until Zionism came in. And thank you for the super chat, Ronwell. I donated to Massie's campaign to protect his seat. Lorez says, Sabby, yeah, the last president with a surplus was Bill Clinton. I thought so. Okay. Thank you for this as well, Ronwell. I'm so glad I made my Vivek meme the moment he hold up his sign against Haley. I'll post it on my Twitter, but it's non-political. I'll DM you that. Thank you. And thank you for the super chat, Snork. The new dig bank system makes MMT impossible. Interesting, Snork. We're going to have to talk about that sometime. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. My Jewish senior senator of New York says it'll be the end of America if we do not finance the Ukrainian Nazis military, but is quick to call you anti-Semitic for being pro-Palestinian, who are Semites also. Well said. What is your famous saying, Sabrina? Oh, yeah. Make it make sense. I'm glad that you mentioned spending money on infrastructure, Sabrina. He should endorse HR 4052, National Infrastructure Public Bank. Well said. Well said.